Hello, I'm Spokane County Commissioner Josh Kerns. Welcome to Spokane County Spotlight. My guests today are State Senators Michael Baumgartner and State Representative Jeff Holy. Both guests today represent Washington's 6th Legislative District. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Before we get started, I'd like to give the audience a little bit of overview about the 6th Legislative District. Could you give a little overview of what the boundaries and makeup of the 6th Legislative District are? We'll start with Senator Baumgartner.
Sure, Commissioner, and it's fun to be able to call you that, Josh. Congratulations on the new job. Yeah, the 6th Legislative District, we're both biased, but it is by far the best legislative district in the state. It goes from the South Hill, from kind of 17th on south down to almost Freeman, and then around with Cheney and Airway Heights, takes in some of Shadle Park, and then a good deal of the 5 Mile Plateau, and then a little bit of Meade. And each district in the state has about 140,000 people in it, and there are 49 districts.
Okay.
Joshua, Commissioner, congratulations. We've worked together for years on this, and I've depended upon you in countless ways as a legislative assistant here, and it makes me glad to see you in this position. You're where you should be at this point, as competent as you are, as good as you are. The 6 is interesting because it almost has bipolar demographics up there. On the bottom side, it goes all the way to Freeman and Valley Forge, so we end up having an ag influence on that, and the left side will come up the county line on the west edge there with all the way through the Air Force Base. Catch Spokane in the South Hill, probably the better, more affluent part of South Hill, and goes all the way around, and we catch all the way to Crestline between, next to Whitworth University and about Francis and Accord there, all the way to Crestline. So we end up having a wide variety of people that we well represent.
Yeah, I think when you represent the 6th District, you really feel like you represent all of Eastern Washington, because we have universities, we have businesses, we have farmland, we have a whole lot of school districts, and you also have that not just the rural areas, but then also are working for things in downtown Spokane and throughout Eastern Washington. So it's fun to have airports, military bases, universities, and all these things, and it's a good district to represent.
All right. So, Senator Baumgartner, you first ran in 2010. Could you give the audience a little explanation on what your background is and what it was that really pushed you to take the run for office?
Yeah, well, I grew up here in Eastern Washington and was blessed to go to WSU and then later Harvard. And after that, I went out to the Middle East, first in private business. And then when the war was going on, I thought I should go as well. And so went to Iraq with the State Department during the surge, spent a year there, and then went to Afghanistan and ran a counter-narcotics team in Helmand Province. When I was there, I was working on building government to try to counter terrorist threats, and I liked doing it, and I thought, well, we've had some problems overseas, let's work on some of the problems back home. So it really was that process that led me to come back and want to serve in the legislature.
All right, and Representative Holy, a little bit about your background and what drove you to run in 2012.
Well, veteran Army back in the mid-70s, WSU grad, both Cougs. Washington State Criminal Justice Academy, Police Academy graduate, 22 years of Spokane Police Department. At the same time, I was a police officer, completed Gonzaga Law School. Done with that, been an attorney for 26 years, and what drove me here? There's always some defining moment. For me, it was when my kids actually started saying that they're gonna have to go elsewhere for opportunity because it doesn't exist here. We're a service-based economy, and I started thinking that I can't do anything to keep our family together, but I can for future families, help them stay together, and we can try and make this a place of opportunity where people come because jobs exist rather than having to go elsewhere.
Okay.
And if I could throw in a compliment to my seatmate, having somebody with Jeff's depth of experience in law enforcement and in the community just really helps in Olympia. He does a great job with that.
Representative Holy, I'd like to start with you on this next question. As we're just coming out of the 2016 election cycle, how did that affect the political landscape in Olympia, and how do you think that's going to play into what we see come out of the legislature?
Well, we had great expectations this time of making significant progress because we've gained seats in the House. We don't have the majority. We're still in the minority. But we made gains and set the trend nationwide here for the last 10 years. Problem is we're in an exactly identical situation now to where we have a small majority in the Senate and we're a minority by 1 seat in the House as we were last term. The things we had in front of us, I don't know, we've got issues that there's appearances. I'm being real careful with that. Appearances that the Supreme Court is attempting to overstep constitutional bounds and limitations of authority at this point. We're talking about they're attempting to insert themselves in the budget-making process, or maybe force a large tax increase here by leverage they're applying. So it's just we're pretty much in the same situation in 2015, except that this is a budget cycle.
Okay, all right. And Senator Baumgartner, do the 2016 elections change the makeup or the landscape of the Senate? And how do you think that'll impact this upcoming session?
Well, as Republicans, we're still in charge of the Senate by one vote. There's 49 members of the Senate, so it takes 25 to be in charge, and we still have 25. Really, the key to working well in the legislature isn't about Republicans or Democrats. It's finding ways to work together on principle for what's good for the people. So we have to find a way to both not get overrun by those Seattle Democrats, stand up to them, fight for Eastern Washington, then come and find a way to work together, and I think we'll do that.
Okay. With the legislative session scheduled to begin on January 10th, what do you anticipate as being the biggest issue the legislature is going to be facing?
Well, a lot of people are talking about the education funding issue. We've put over $5 billion new dollars into education in the last few years. Before there wasn't all-day kindergarten, now there is all-day kindergarten. Before there wasn't reduced class sizes, now there are. But we're going to have to do more. But that'll be the big question, I think. But there's also some very other important issues. We need to continue to build our new WSU Medical School here. I helped lead the charge on finally getting funding on our North-South Freeway. Got to make sure that funding is protected and gets implemented. So the education issue is the big thing, but the other issues really come down to protecting jobs and building a better future here, and we'll be focused on those as well.
All right. And anything you want to add to that on what you think is going to be the big issue that is going to come out of this legislative session?
Senator Baumgartner is on point with this here. The McCleary is still the elephant in the room. We've got other things that are going to be dynamic and in play. If we have a majority one in the Senate and a minority one in the House, we're going to have possibly local elections or federal appointments come out of this different federal campaign cycle here that may change the complexity of the legislature itself. We've got a lot of things in play. Mental health issues are the next McCleary-esque issue to come up under the state constitution, Article 13. Protecting police officers, that's getting to be a horrendous mess out there. The pushback on law enforcement, that breaks my heart. And attempting to establish a leadership role, even in a minority, but with a minority of one in the House Republican caucus. So it's just, and following the state constitution, Article 1, Section 1, and making sure everything we do attempts to maintain and preserve individual rights.
Okay. Do either of you have any bills that you're planning on introducing when the session starts, or have you pre-filed bills already?
Well, I have a couple key bills that deal with property crime here in the Spokane area. I just think property crime is at unacceptable levels, and we need to work together as a community and fight back. And so I'll have bills for an enhanced sentencing, a bill I've sponsored in the past, and we're going to rerun it and I think have some good success at it this year, where we'll have even more sentencing for those. A lot of property crimes are committed by a few really bad offenders, and we need to keep those folks locked up. Those people that come out, we need to increase supervision and make sure that law enforcement can keep track of them. And so I think the legislature can give some help there as well too. So property crime will be one of the issues because that affects too many people here in Spokane.
Yeah, it's certainly something we've been hearing an awful lot about in this community. Representative Holey?
Well, probably the main bill that I have, I've got 2 or 3 out there that are blue sheets sitting on my desk right now, waiting to do a 4th session, but is to prohibiting the use of eminent domain for economic development purposes. This is the Kelo decision a couple of years back here that we've had government entities be able to take private property and then place it with another private entity here because it's to their advantage. We're saying that there has to be a test out there in the Supreme Court standard. Justice Stevens wrote the concurring opinion here, but said that it has to be more than just incidental benefit to the government entity itself. So we're going to make sure that that stays in place, that you can't actually take private property, give it to somebody else for economic development just because it benefits incidentally the government entity. Protecting and preserving individual liberties. And quite frankly, one of the most paramount of those is private property ownership.
All right. At this point, do either of you know what committees you'll be sitting on in this upcoming session?
Yeah, I'll be returning as the chair of the Commerce and Labor Committee, and we're going to add something new to that, which is a specific focus on sports. So we're going to call it the chair of the Commerce, Labor, and Sports Committee. And the reason we're adding sports is we've dealt with some sports issues in the past, including fantasy football gaming, issues of amateur athletics when it comes to the Spokane Chiefs and Spokane Indians. But I think WIAA needs some oversight. We're hearing some complaints about high school students having to travel too far for playoff games, and some of the processes by which WIAA is impacting people's lives. I think it needs the Senate to maybe take a look at. So that's one of the reasons we've expanded that committee. I'll also return to the Higher Education Committee, the Healthcare Committee, and the Transportation Committee. And the reason I have that committee lineup is to make sure that we get our medical schools built and to make sure that we continue to get more than our fair share of transportation funding.
On the other hand, we've got the House. In the House, we actually had committee days about 2 weeks ago here, and we just had the Speaker of the House define which committees will exist, which is interesting. Nobody's actually been notified as to committee appointment. I was ranking minority in state government last year on higher ed in the SIN committee, which is marijuana, gambling, and alcohol. I expect this year I'll probably stay on higher ed. I'm expecting to possibly see public safety committee and or judiciary come out of this session here. However, not sure yet.
Okay, all right. You discussed earlier, you mentioned the McCleary decision. Do both of you feel that that is going to be the largest issue that the legislature is going to be facing this upcoming session?
I think Jeff describing it as the elephant in the room is a good way to put it. You know, again, we've put
nothing partisan about that.
No,
Mike.
and yeah,
that's not speech.
I guess it's so big. It's an elephant and a donkey in the room. But it's we have put again over $5 billion new dollars. Have things like all-day kindergarten and reduced class sizes. So we're going to continue to put more funding in education. But what we need to make sure that we're doing is not just pumping money into a system that's partially broken. You know, we need to have an education system in this state that meets the needs of every student. We need more vocational education. We need more education that helps those people from different backgrounds and from single-parent homes. And we need everybody to have the same opportunity to be prepared for jobs in the 21st century. Right now, we're not getting that. We need more reform that involves parents, that gets the community more involved, that makes sure there's a great teacher in every classroom. And so a part of our focus is going to be not just putting money into the system, but fixing the system, reforming it, and improving it.
Okay. Representative Holy?
Well, I think Senator Baumgartner nailed the results we'd like to achieve. Just spot on. That's exactly where we want to go. But when you talk about the impacts on the McCleary decision, which aspect? I mean, you've got the Supreme Court extending beyond constitutional boundaries. You've got defining ample provision in Article 9, Section 1 of the state constitution, and as required for amply providing for a common education. How about local school districts having the ability to negotiate contracts out there that ultimately fall upon the state as responsibility as they enhance the cost of, or the contracts or the cost of basic education, yet at the same time they have the authority to do so. We're ultimately saddled with the responsibility as a result of their negotiations. There's a lot of different things in play here, or if you want to come right down to it, the absolute cost. Senator Baumgartner is right. We're about $5 billion into this in the last couple of sessions here, and that doesn't seem to be enough, even though it's hitting 48% plus of the operating budget at this point. So, you know, the bottom line is I think we actually have to deal with the reality of this. This is a constitutional mandate. This isn't a matter of making people happy or not making people happy, or fairness or unfairness. This is a constitutional mandate. Let's fund this first. And all the things we actually have the ability to have some discretionary input on allocation of resources after that, then we'll do that, and that's the legislative process. But in order to meet the requirements of the Supreme Court and the state constitution, let's address this first and then be real about what we have left. And then if we talk about tax increases, we'll actually understand what we're paying, we're asking for tax increases for, not using education late in the game as a matter of brinksmanship to try and force tax increases.
Okay, and that sort of leads into our next question. So over the last several years, we've seen a lot of special sessions. What do you think the chances are that you're going to be able to get out on time, and what's it going to take to avoid those special sessions?
I don't have any vacation plans on 4th of July. You, Senator?
Well, you know, there's absolutely no reason that legislature can't get its job done on time. But a lot of that's going to be up to the Seattle area Democrats and the legislators, and not to be partisan, but sometimes in a negotiation, you can use time and pressure and travel, and Jeff and I have to drive over Snoqualmie Pass on frequent occasions, and sometimes, frankly, that gets to be part of the negotiation tactics. But, you know, the real thing I'd point out to the legislature, though, is even though we have had some special sessions, we have had repeated bipartisan balanced budgets that haven't relied on new tax increases. And the great thing about our state legislature is it's part-time, it has a balanced budget requirement, and we can't print money. So it forces Republicans and Democrats to work together, and it's a lot different than the other Washington, D.C., where they just kind of cast continuing spending resolutions and kick the can down the road.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that. One of the other things we could do too is to avoid the stare down at the end of session here, because these budget issues actually never come to bear until about the last 30 days, 15 days of session, where everybody wants to go home, and all of a sudden it's like, well, who's gonna break gaze first? You know, who's gonna back down on this? Let's start addressing budgetary issues in the first 2 weeks of session and get these things out of the way and negotiated early, kind of thing. And then we actually have a chance to do that and go back to my previous statement about not using education and a constitutional mandate as a matter of brinksmanship to attempt to accommodate some sort of a political agenda that as a minority, we've been along for the ride and had to deal with, but as a majority, I think that we probably wouldn't do that. We would address the issues first as required.
And I have a solution to the special sessions, which I only say half jokingly, is if all special sessions were either held in Walla Walla or Colville, we'd be done in about a week, because the cupcakes from King County wouldn't drive over Snoqualmie Pass twice, and they just want to get the deal done. So, here we come, Walla Walla and Colville, we'll get it done.
Yeah. If we kind of bring it more back home here to the Spokane region, what do you two think the recent initiative passage to increase the state minimum wage, what type of impact do you think that's going to have on us here in Spokane?
Well, I would say that, business regulation for downtown Seattle is a lot different than for us here on a border community. And Washington State is oftentimes pretty friendly to big business. If you're Boeing or you're Microsoft, you can get a special tax deal. But if you're the little guy running a dry cleaner out in Spokane Valley or trying to, just sell a better widget than the other guy, it's pretty tough. So what we need to do is the voters have given us this wage increase. We need to try to manage it, and we need to look at the overall cost of doing business in this state and bring down things like workers' compensation reform, workers' compensation costs, and unemployment costs, and try to make our economy more competitive, because we do have the border just so close.
It's interesting that we're going to artificially inflate minimum wage when the market actually doesn't demand that. And you're right, Senator, about being a border community here. It impacts us twice as hard because we have to compete 15 minutes one direction here with somebody that has a federal minimum wage level. This will effectively be twice that. I'm not interested in more minimum wage jobs in Spokane. Spokane's a service-based economy. It has too many minimum wage jobs. That's the problem, is that's all we have available are service-based jobs here, a vast majority. So the goal becomes, what do we do to attract those $30 to $50 an hour living wage jobs in Spokane? Bring here a institutional, industrial, supply chain-based, manufacturing kind of a business base. We actually create wealth. We're just not cycling in other people's money out there. That's what I've tried to do since I hit the ground 4 years ago, coming to the legislature, and what I'll continue to do here. And we have, which brings into play three different pieces of conversation. One of them is the north-south corridor. Senator's right about preserving funds for that. That's going to create a new economic corridor that'll have a dramatic effect on business development off that. 20-year build-out. WSU Medical School, another 20-year build-out on that. All the different things that are required from the staffing, the service-based people, the housing that's necessary, the service. There's a 20-year build-out there. And the third leg in that stool has to do with the West Plains. And the West Plains is almost like Kent back in the early 60s. And you see what happened with Boeing Plant 1, Andover Parkway, all the Tier 1 providers, all the service industries, and the economic corridor. We've got that sitting there in the West Plains ready to go. These are the things we can focus on so we don't have to worry about minimum wage issues out there. Let's get a living wage.
Yes. Yeah. Could I ask, from your point of view, what do you think are the opportunities and threats to economic development within Spokane County, but more specifically for the 6th legislative district? I know you touched on a few of those in your last answer.
The opportunities are, it's the Kent analog, Kent simile with what we have up there. You actually have cheap property. We've got industrial parks out there where the infrastructure actually exists. It's in place. You've got the curbs, you've got the sidewalks, you've got marquees, and the weeds are higher than the marquees because nobody's built a thing out there in 25 years. These are all the things we have. You can buy frontage, literally have freight frontage, get access into the airport. That hasn't existed in Seattle probably close to 50 years at this point. We've got so many different things that are there. The threat is that unlike the 2003 nickel gas tax package, where the project list was part of the tax package, you pass it, it's cast. There's no negotiation. Our project list is separate and dynamic. And that great sucking sound you hear from Seattle sometimes is our funding going away, like it has for the last 50 years when they proposed 405, which is the East Corridor in Seattle, North-South, 520, which is Evergreen Point Floating Bridge, and the North-South Corridor at the same time. They've been rebuilt at this point, and they're getting expanded, and we're just getting a first tickle of a 16-year build-out on this that we're going to have to maintain, make sure we'll protect it, to make sure that our funding source does not go away for other projects they deem to be more worthy on the other side of the mountains. That's probably the largest threat.
Okay. Senator Baumgartner?
Well, I'm very optimistic about what the future holds for Spokane and Eastern Washington. We're going to, with the new WSU Medical School that we're putting together, there's going to be not just more doctors, but there's going to be all sorts of medical biotech companies for investment and other issues. Out on the West Plains, we're going to have all kinds of development. I think we can have aerospace manufacturing on the West Plains, and that's going to go well. And I'm very confident of the funding we've put in the North-South Corridor. That's going to radically transform for the better North Spokane County. So it's really optimistic. And I think really there's only one really big threat, which is if our elected officials don't really listen to the people on all of these issues. If we listen to the people on the ground and ignore the special interest, but really listen to the people, then I think we're going to see success in all these projects. And that's why it's an exciting time to be in Spokane. This is where, in Eastern Washington, this is really where the future lies.
Okay. What do you two see in store for the WSU Med School, and where do you guys envision the funding source coming from?
Well, it's going to have to come from just prioritization in the state budget, and I have every confidence that we can achieve that. There was, not surprisingly, we had a monopoly medical school here in the state, and monopolists don't usually like to give up that monopoly, but for the good of the state, Republicans and Democrats were able to come together under the leadership of Elson Floyd, and we've got this thing started. We have 20 medical students getting ready now, and the first class is going to come next year. They've had something like already over 500 application inquiries just in the first month. And so you can tell that a lot of people are excited about this school. It's also great that we have the expanded UW medical presence at the University of Gonzaga, another great partnership. And, competition is a wonderful thing, especially if it's friendly competition. So we're going to have to work hard, and we will, and we have to get some of those resources out of Seattle and back here at home. But we've had a successful track record in doing that, and I'm sure we'll do it with the medical school as well.
All right.
Commissioner, I think that the first class we have of 60 students we're looking at right now. It's just amazing we're up and running this quick. We have achieved preliminary accreditation, and we've done it faster than any other school that's attempted to establish itself in the United States in history. This is a monumental community effort that came together to make this happen. The economic impact of this, obviously, will be a 20-year build-out. We talked to before here that this is going to be one of the legs of economic development in Spokane, and quite frankly, if you talk about the budget issue, $10 to $11 million to get this up and running in close to a $40 billion biennial budget, I don't think that's much of a heavy lift. I think that we'll be able to well accomplish that. Okay.
And so something that a lot of folks have seen in the media recently, there could be sort of a shift, a little bit of a shakeup in politics here locally. But one of the names that we have seen mentioned is our guest, Senator Baumgartner. Is there something that potentially is in your future coming up?
Well, we'll see. There's been some reports that Kathy McMorris Rogers may get a position in the new administration, and if she does, I've announced that I would run for Congress. I really enjoy fighting for Eastern Washington in Olympia. I think we've had some good success there. The one area that I don't fight on over there is against the threat of radical terrorism, and so I think if I were to go to Washington, D.C., I could both fight to protect our jobs here, but also fight against that threat of radical terrorism. counterterrorism based on my experience in Iraq and Afghanistan.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you for giving us a preview of the 2017 legislative session, but I'm afraid we're out of time. I'd like to once again thank our guests, Senators Mike Baumgartner and Representative Jeff Holy, for joining us here today. I'm County Commissioner Josh Kerns. Thank you for joining us for Spokane County Spotlight.